So hold on. There you go.
So Dan, how you doing?
I'm very good, thanks, Roger. Thanks so much for getting in touch with me and giving me an opportunity to chat with you. I'm excited about it today.
I'm super excited as well. I think I spoke to members of your team, and it was a bit of a email tag going on until we eventually nailed the time together.
Yeah, yeah, they did. The kind of work you do is the kind of the things we like to do as well. Letting people understand the body and how they deal with the environment they're in, how they improve their body. So I was excited when I found that, Roger, that you were interested in chatting, and we finally got it together, and
Yeah.
now we can work a little bit together. So here we go.
Awesome. So thanks so much. So you've written a book called Radiation Nation right here.
Yep.
And we'll probably dissect and go for a few parts or key elements which I feel a lot of people might want to know about. And you can also cover some things which you think is very important in the book as well. But generally, to write a book, a person would need to have a bit of knowledge in a particular area. So
Right.
This one in particular being on EMF, that will take a lot of dedication and years of research. Could you give us a little background on yourself as to, what you've been up to bring you to the point of writing this book or where you are today?
Roger, in the U.S., we had what was referred to as the Bell system, a network of manufacturing, development, products, services for all the telecom needs of the country. And I started my career in Bell Labs, which was the research side of the telecommunications. And I spent a lot of my career defining standards for telecommunications equipment. And I also analyzed the technology that was deployed in telecommunications. So I had a large, rich background of the technical side of communications. And so this kind of technology stuff we talk about today, I had a lot of background in for many, many years. And I didn't even realize, even when I was doing it, I used to worry about when electronics equipment interferes with other electronic equipment. Ironically, this is electronic equipment interfering with the human body. And so I was worried about technology interfering with each other when I maybe should have been more worried about how it infects our own lives. And so that's where I started, had a lot of background in it. Mm. And then it turned out I started a company that helps people shield themselves. And I began realizing that the average person wasn't quite familiar with what the issues could be with the modern devices we have around us every day that have come more and more close. You know, when I was growing up, if I had a cell phone 20 years ago, I had no one to call because none of my friends had a cell phone. Today, at 6 years old, you get a cell phone, whether you want it or not, and it's throughout your whole life at this point. So it turned out that it was never really a real problem until more and more of these technologies started coming around us. Well, at the same time, the medical community was doing a whole lot of work, really, really good work about identifying the potential dangers of these modern technologies around us. And it was really, really good work, well-structured laboratory analysis work they were doing, well-structured, very well peer-reviewed. And yet no one knew about that work that was being done, in my opinion. And that's what prompted me to write the book with my son. we said, look, we have some background in this stuff, and we may be able to present it in a way that people can understand what it is, and if they think it's an issue, what they may want to do about it. And that was the genesis of the book.
Okay, that's amazing. That's cool. So, I mean, we're living in a digital world where pretty much everything has become wireless,
Yeah,
from telephones to mobiles, from snail mail to email and
right,
text.
right.
What else? You've got even going to your bank, where you'd speak to a personal bank manager to set up an account. Now you can do it remotely from an
Yeah,
airplane.
yeah. And you know, it's funny, Roger. We're not going to throw all this stuff away because it may potentially impact us
Yeah.
in a negative way, right? And it turns out there's a lot of things we can do if we're aware of the potential dangers, and things we can do with our own bodies to help build up the resilience of our bodies with these kinds of exposures. So there was a lot we can do, and yet no one really knew it was a challenge. Uh, and yet they were being affected and didn't know it, affected and didn't know it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's slowly get into it. Obviously, we are surrounded by what is called EMFs, and I'm not too sure, just like what you're saying, if many people are really think about it, or are even aware of what it is, or any what it does, or any potential implications. Like, how would you describe EMF for someone in layman terms, for someone who doesn't understand?
There are basically two types we want to worry about. The first type is extremely low frequency radiation. When you have electricity coming into your house, and there's wires running through the walls, there's an emission of electromagnetic radiation that's coming off that wire. Anytime there's a current flow with any wire, there is an emission. It's called extremely low frequency emission. So when you use your hair dryer, you don't dry your hair because you
Not
don't
too
have
often.
hair.
Yeah, not too often. Yeah.
But if you had one, it generates electromagnetic radiation as a byproduct of it creating that air. Your toaster, when you toast your toast in the morning, that's using electromagnetic radiation emissions that are being generated. So there's all these little devices that are generating electromagnetic radiation, most of which is fairly safe to us.
Right.
We've been living with for a while. But then there's this other class of stuff, the cell phone, the laptop, the computers, all connecting to a Wi-Fi, all connecting to a cell tower or some other device. All of a sudden, everything's interconnecting. And these devices are using a radio frequency signal, electromagnetic radiation. It's RF. And the energy of that allows you to go several miles or hundreds of yards. It goes distances. Well, when it's going those distances, it's also hitting you. So if it's connecting to a tower, it's connecting to you as well. And that's the RF. The radio frequency signals for cell phones are about somewhere between 1 and 2 gigahertz. Well, when you have a microwave oven and you take a piece of meat, put it inside a microwave oven, and you push the button and it starts cooking the meat, what's actually happening is the water that's between the cells are heating up, oscillating the cells, and those cells get hot, cook the meat, voila, you have your finished cooked meat. Well, that's 2.6 gigahertz, 2.3 gigahertz. It's almost exactly what your cell phone is. It's almost exactly what your Wi-Fi is. It's a microwave signal.
Wow.
The only thing is, it's much less power. but it is a microwave signal. It creates heat and it can create damage.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, you don't even think of it, but it's true.
What would you say gives the most microwave signal in your household?
Your Wi-Fi.
The Wi-Fi.
Yeah, your Wi-Fi is so a cell phone is 1.6 watts. That's the energy level that's pushing out to the cell tower. 1.6 watts per kilogram, close to the head. A Wi-Fi can do 6 watts. In other words, it's 5-6 times the level of a cell phone. So when you're really, really close to a Wi-Fi, that's a pretty solid hot signal that's transmitting near you, and it is a microwave. And just like the meat you put in your microwave, the water heats up the cells and oscillates the cells.
Gosh. So that's pretty much like what's going on in your brain when you have the phone next to your head.
Exactly.
Oh God.
So in the US, it turns out that the standard of 1.6 watts per kilogram was standardized so a 6-foot male head in that area where the cell phone is won't heat up by more than 2 degrees and penetrate the head by 1 to 2 inches. That's what the standard is. The power is being restricted so it doesn't go through your head. Well, that's the theory, right? We use the US Army as the model of the human male so we could figure out how to keep it to 2 degrees, right? That's what they did in the standard. Well, it turns out that represents about 2 to 3% of the entire population in the US. When you're a child, it doesn't go 1 to 2 inches, it goes completely through their head. And so if you're a 6-year-old child you give a cell phone to, that's at a very, very young age, going right through their head, and it's through their lifetime. So what is the impact of that? Well, we know through research and study work that there are clearly potential dangers.
Let's get into that. It's because I was about to ask you, like, is EMF harmful?
Roger, this is one of the most controversial issues. You have a multi-trillion-dollar industry that's selling a lot of services, making a lot of money, and they think that there's no challenges, none at all. Then you have the private industry that's doing research work themselves, and they're clearly identifying direct links to things like tendinitis, neurological issues, psychological issues, depression, anxiety, dizziness, fatigue, headaches. So we have a lot of that evidence too. So it's controversial.
Wow.
But as we move along, we're learning more and more. And recently in the US, there was a study, an epidemiology study, and in that study, they found a direct causal link between a cell phone and frontal lobe cancer. So there was a statistically significant increase in frontal lobe cancers when there was an exposure to a cell phone transmitter. And then that was, again, another significant study was done in the Ramazani Institute. And they replicated that study work. The populations were, 20,000 or so rats and mice that were involved. And they came up with the same conclusion, that there was statistically significant increase in frontal lobe cancer. And by the way, heart cancer too. So we know that there's been many thousands of studies that talk about the direct correlative links between cell phone use, Wi-Fi use, and the human body. And then there was substantial reinforcement of that with two independent epidemiology studies, both coming to the same conclusion. There's direct links. So for me, it's not as much a debate as it is for others, because I've looked at the scientific evidence, and there certainly seems to be some evidence. Even the World Health Organization, they consider this a to be carcinogenic. If you're in a classroom and you have your child in the classroom, and in the front of the classroom they have a gasoline open in the room, and then the other corner they have a welder welding metals together, and then you have a Wi-Fi in the back room, all three are to be carcinogenics. They're probable cancer-causing agents. So they're not guaranteed by who is that it is, but they several years ago believed it was a possible carcinogenic. It turns out that they didn't have the benefit of these epidemiology studies. If they had, it would have been considered a class 1 carcinogenic.
Right.
Because there's enough evidence now.
So there's been studies that prove that it's a carcinogen.
Yep.
So these studies were on mice.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to I don't know, study on humans possibly. Is there a way? I don't know. It might not sound.
Or Roger,
we are the study, right?
Every study that ultimately led to a proven linkage to cancer was done through epidemiology studies.
Right.
It's not like it's far-fetched. It is always the start of any research. And so, when they say that, and there's a real reason you use those, because there's similar biological infrastructure, and that biological infrastructure is a very rapid life interval. In other words, within a couple of years, you can gain all the data you want from it. So it is always has been one of the leading indicators that begins substantiating linkages. So when someone says to me that I don't believe it because I'm not a rat, they don't know research. They don't know science. They really don't understand it. It is part of what's been going on for hundreds of years. We've always used that as a source.
It's crazy.
It is. Yeah, it really is.
All right. So if there's clinical studies to prove this, to show it is harmful, why is it still legal? How can it be legal, or why is there not at least a cap on the amount of EMF being emitted?
There are these factions, as I mentioned before, and there is a raging war going on, a battle between the standards bodies and the research scientists talking about what is the right way of doing it. And by the way, this is something that's gone on in so many other industries. The smoking industry. I was smoking cigarettes when I was 12 years old because I thought I was going to be a big man, right? That was quite a number of years ago, if you know my age.
I don't know.
At that time, Roger, there was no public understanding of any linkage whatsoever. The public did not know. And, 35 years later, 40 years later, it's now in the US, you can't sell cigarettes without you identifying the fact that they may cause cancer. And everyone has the same thing. Do you know when I started smoking, research knew there was a direct link to cancer, cancer of the lungs and smoking? It just takes that many years to get a public understanding of what it is and what it's not. And there's so many instances of this kind of case. So I don't see this as unique. It to me it's the kind of evolution of things we find about in our environment that we introduce, and it takes us a long time before. X-rays were so important to our research. Well, the guy who invented X-rays had a lab assistant And they used to run around showing everyone how X-rays work. Well, he died of X-ray poisoning. They didn't know that that's what would happen, right? Until they got the experience. Takes time
No,
before we
they
understand.
used to use X-rays for is it foot measurements or something?
Right, right, exactly.
Come
That's what they used to do, right? But
on.
Roger, it's not the linkages to the cancers. These are statistically low-level stuff. That it's not like 20% of the population has going to get cancer over the next 10 years. That's not going to happen. So let's put this in context. What I'm more worried about, and what the research in science is suggesting, is that, as you pointed out a while ago, I've got X-rays going through my head. What's the impact, right? And so these neurological impacts, the psychological changes, the influence to the thyroid. Believe it or not, the thyroid is influenced by the cell phone, and the thyroid controls a whole lot of stuff in your body. The pineal gland. There was the most recent research from Yale was that if there is a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi signal, and you have a mutated gene, and there is some other chemical within your body, you were 3 times more likely to have cancer of the pineal gland. So there is clear influence. When you exercise and you want to try to be as healthy as possible, when you use a cell phone, when you have a Wi-Fi next to you, it suppresses your immune system. Believe it or not, your body is saying, it's not good for me. I'm going to pull back. My immune will be suppressed as a result of that. And there's a whole raft of gut immune system functions that are really being potentially impaired because of these RF signals that are in our environment. And I'm more worried about those kinds of things for us than I am the cancer-related stuff, because it's really much more of us are getting involved. So if you use cell phones for a while, 10 years or more, you're 3 times more likely to have a brain cancer. If you get and you have a cell phone exposure that's slightly excess for some reason when you were younger, you may begin having electrohypersensitivity to these kind of devices.
Sorry, say that last bit again. When?
Electromagnetic radiation that is exposed to you, you can potentially respond to it after an aggressive exposure to that, to electric hypersensitivity. In other words, when you see a cell phone, you can barely keep it close to your head because it hurts your head. And that kind of thing is a body response. When you see a bear in the woods and you bump right up into the bear, what do? You run. You have an automatic response to that bear. Well, the body is over time is evolved where it has a cell danger response. The cell doesn't properly work because it's now been exposed. And so it's like thinking, well, I'm going to try to protect myself. You may have heard of this as oxidative stress.
Yeah.
That's what you heard of it as. That's the imbalance of the free radicals with the antioxidants, right? So that stuff is now imbalanced. So the next generation of understanding of oxidative stress is CDR, cell danger response. And that's when you talk about complications that we barely understand. And we're only at the tip of the iceberg in understanding that stuff.
Wow. So depending however long you've been using the mobile phone or cell phone could determine your chances of having this hypersensitivity?
Yeah,
Right,
definitely.
right. And the phones which were about, I don't know, some years ago, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, when they first came out, was the frequency higher or anything? Were they less, I don't know, maybe less regulated, regulated for the amount of waves? if that makes sense.
So roughly, the RF transmission of a cell phone, Wi-Fi, very little has changed, and the frequency ranges they use. So we've gone from the cell phone back in the 70s, early 70s, and we've gone to 1G, 2G, second generation, 3G, third generation. So the phones have evolved over time. By and large, they've remained basically in the same frequency range.
Right.
And now some of your listeners may be aware that we're now into the 5G space with cell phones. And 5G, much of it is all within the same frequency rate that it's always been. But there's a small component that's for small cell sites that are using millimeter waves, 20 gigahertz, 90 gigahertz, much faster rates, because the data being transferred needs to be much more higher for the broadband demand that we have in our society today. Mm-hmm. That stuff is very different than what the previous generations have been. So there's not been much change there, except it went from analog to digital, but the rates roughly the same.
Right. We'll get into 5G in a moment. I definitely want to get into that.
Yeah, we really do, because there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned about children, and obviously
yes.
their bodies being a lot more sensitive. So what's happening for children that have mobile phones? Are children more at risk? And also we have, tablets which are now introduced into school. So kids will probably be using it a lot more than adults, in all fairness. What's your views there?
Well, you're absolutely right, Roger. When a 6-year-old child uses a cell phone, as we mentioned before, it goes right through their head. Why is that true? Well, when you're growing up, you have a very immature skull. It's not thick as an adult. The soft tissue is, the softer it is, the more malleable it is, the more potentially endangered it is as a result. Like the epidemiology studies, I mentioned it was the heart and the frontal lobe, right?
Yeah.
Those are the softest parts of your body. So as theirs are even softer than you as an adult. So it makes them more susceptible. They're actually 3 to 4 times more susceptible than you or I. And so they have that exposure, and there is a penetration of that signal through their entire head. And as they grow up, it becomes less and less until it's 1 to 2 inches.
Wow.
We know, well, here's a fact. If you have a concussion and you have your blood-brain barrier goes down, that is the protection to your brain. And you had a signal close to your head going into your brain, how much power does it have to have before it mutates a cell? That's the question, right? Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, a cell phone is 1.6 watts per kilogram, as I mentioned before in the US. When you have the conditions I just spoke about, 0.1 watts per kilogram can mutate a frontal lobe cell.
Wow.
So it takes 15 times less power level to influence that. And we know it can damage the cell with long-term impacts. And that's what we're exposing our children to, is that kind of exposure. And worldwide, there's been very little changes in the standards, although in Europe, um, there's been more consciousness about the power levels versus the U.S. almost by half. So, I mean, I'm really encouraged that the European community and the standards bodies have worked towards helping reduce these exposures to more acceptable levels. Are they acceptable enough for kids? No, they're just not.
Wow. Wow, wow. I don't know, it's weird. Every time I hear about if there's certain things which are bad in Europe, I know the US, they just take it to next levels. Like it's weird. Like if
Yeah,
it's the same as GMOs or just the standard of food. You know, I've
yeah,
seen people compare food labels of the exact same food and the amount of ingredients in the US, they just increase it by an extra 30 or something. It's
yeah. And that's exactly what is done with the standards for cell phones. It's sort of, and it's not changing. The,
yeah,
the standards bodies in the U.S. are not unlike that in Europe. Um, the standard bodies, they typically get experts that supposedly understand the technologies, because a layperson coming off the street doesn't necessarily understand what they're being exposed to. So the way the standards bodies work is by bringing in those who have been providing the technologies. It's like putting the fox in the hen house, right? So the people who have created this and selling the services are those who are helping define the standards. You know, the revolving door it's referred to as a revolving door. That's not unlike what's happening in Europe. All the your standards bodies are being driven largely by experts who have come from the industry, not by the medical community, by the way.
right.
Typically, you don't have your MDs who specialize in neurology. You don't have doctors who understand the impact to the sleeping process
Mm,
being interfered with for an RF signal, which is something we should talk about as well. So it's
mm.
because the standards bodies have the control they have, and they're only influenced over time, unfortunately, after the fact.
It's it seems to me as though it's really important. Like before something like this can be, I don't know, like just widespread spread and everywhere. It's like you don't have a say in the matter as to whether you're going to be exposed to EMF. Like
Right.
you go into an airport, radiation around you. Obviously, there's certain spots which is going to be more than others. Airport being one of them, and it's I don't know. It's just a standard procedure. It's and there's no. You was talking about no real neurologists or like real medical experts who's a part of this whole thing. How's that even
Right.
possible? Like, and you've got no say in the matter.
Right.
However, if you decide to, I don't know, you can drink and become intoxicated and you could get arrested for being intoxicated, but yet you
Yeah.
can be intoxicated through EMF against your will and you
Yeah.
can't say anything about it.
Right. And there is evidence. Well, I'll give you a story. The head of the FCC, that's the standards body in the U.S. that defines those standards.
Mm,
The chairman of that was the chairman of the cell phone industry for 30 years. And so he went from being a representative of the cell phone industry and became the head of the FCC, which defines the standards for that service, for that industry, right?
mm.
And guess what? They were the ones who fairly recently approved the 5G standards. And so we as individuals didn't have influence, a lot of medical community experts attempted to influence, but were unsuccessful. And so there are now several lawsuits against the FCC in the US to try to help bring more current understanding to that standards body of what the impacts can be to the human. So, this sounds like really bad stuff to some extent, but the reality of it is, Roger, I'm sort of cutting to the chase. If you have a cell phone to your head, as I mentioned, 1 to 2 inches in can heat up by 2 degrees. Well, if you have it 4 foot away, 98% of that danger is gone. So it's just understanding the environment and the things you can do to minimize those exposures. And there are a lot we can do. And we're going to talk more about that. But
Yeah.
I want to make sure we understand that if you're aware of your environment, you can plan for that and you can get pretty safe, independent of what's going on by the standards bodies. You can stay pretty safe.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, we'll definitely come to that. We're going to come to like all the safety measures and stuff afterwards.
Right,
I just want to get into the understanding of potential dangers and what we need to be wary of and that sort of thing.
So one of the things I was going to mention to you before is, and we were talking about, you may become electro-hypersensitive. Remember that?
Yeah.
Over 20% of us are electric hypersensitive. You get to a cell phone, you can feel it in your head, you can feel it tingling in your hand. You get foggy, you get dizzy. So over 20% of the entire population is electric hypersensitive. So we already know that you would remember chemical sensitivity, multiple chemical sensitivity. People have problems with volatile organic compounds, gases in the air. 20% of the population is electric hypersensitive to chemicals in the air, gases in the air. That's the same for the electric hypersensitive. And it's growing very quickly. And believe it or not, 80% of those are women.
Oh, really?
Not men, yeah. They're women. And we don't know why. But it's true that, they may be the canary in the coal mine where, because they're more sensitive for hormonal reasons, for whatever those reasons, they're becoming more sensitive. And it can get pretty serious for some of them, debilitating it sometimes.
And there wouldn't be an actual experiment or study to show, like, if two people had used a cell phone for a certain amount of time, what the impact will be to show the differences. No?
Right, exactly. That kind of stuff hasn't happened. So you can't prove it, in other words. In fact, the way I like to describe it, the only way the community at large would ever accept the guarantee that there's a challenge is if you take 10,000 children, put them in a classroom, turn on the Wi-Fi, and 10 years later, see what happens. And then take another 10,000, give them GMO products, non-GMO products, good eating, good exercise, and then compare the populations. If there is an increase in cancers as a result of direct links to the transmitters, then we now can prove that it's dangerous. And of course, we're never going to do that, Roger, right? We're never going to take chin-children kids. So it's going to be a debate for a long time.
Yeah. What's the difference between, you have ionizing radiation and you have non-ionizing? I mean, they're both radiation, but what's the difference exactly?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Roger, because some argue that ionized radiation can be lethal, but ionizing can't. Non-ionizing can't. So there's an argument around that. Well, what is ionized radiation? X-rays. When you go to the dentist and they put this machine next to your teeth and they run into the other room and you hear this zeet, this noise, and they look out and they look and see if you're still there, that's ionized radiation.
Right.
That's terror rates. They're orders of magnitude higher rates than the cell phones or RF signals. In fact, ultraviolet light is X-ray, is electromagnetic radiation. It's visible electromagnetic radiation. And ultraviolet is where it goes from non-ionized to ionized. That's where the break is, believe it or not.
Right.
And so what happens when they point that cone to your teeth? What the concern is that there's enough energy coming from the transmission that it will take the electron that's spinning around that atom and it will knock it out of its orbit, and then we'll charge it from negative to positive. That's what ionizing comes from. It comes from it becoming positive. And
Okay.
because ionized has enough energy to knock it out of its orbit. So there is a clear direct link that's evident for so many that this could be dangerous and I got to stay away from it. Well, it turns out that with non-ionizing radiation, the breakdown of the cell is very different. The breakdown of the cell, there's a membrane around the cell. And when you have this microwave signal hitting this membrane of the cell, it begins weakening. And when it gets to the point of being really, really weak, your own calcium channel, your own calcium within your body will penetrate the cell. It fills with oxide, and then there's other chemical things that happen where it becomes mutated and DNA damage. So the mechanics are different, how the breakdown is, but both have the end result.
Right. So the non-ionizing is still creating damage, but maybe in a slower way.
Yeah,
Or,
in a different way. The mechanics are different.
yeah.
But
yeah,
it's still, at the end of the day, a DNA damaged cell.
yeah. Wow. 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 I'm just amazed.
Yeah.
So
And there's a lot of research on the breakdown of non-ionizing cell. Dr. Paul has done a wonderful work in
Dr. Paul.
breaking down the mechanics for us.
Dr. Paul who?
Dr. Powell is his name, Paul.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
Yeah, out of West Coast of the U.S. And he's done wonderful work for us understanding it. As Dr. Ali Johansson has done wonderful work showing us how emissions can suppress our immune system. What are the mechanics of the suppression and what's actually happening with our body, and documenting what that is. So we're getting more and more knowledgeable about this stuff as we go along.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully with the more knowledge we have, more legislations possibly. I don't know. It's almost conspiratorial. Like, I don't know. I do question whether anything will be done about it. It seems, I think you mentioned it's a multi-trillion or whatever. There's too much money involved.
There's no doubt. It's always been true. But, you know, I often tell the story about frame of mind with smoking. I remember in late 70s, in the UK, there were pediatricians asking the chairman of a cigarette firm, is it good for a woman who's pregnant to smoke? And this guy says, no, there's no reason why you shouldn't smoke. And then he said, wait a minute, the baby's actually going to be smaller because of the cigarette smoking. And what woman wouldn't want a smaller baby? That's what he said
Oh my
at
God.
that time, right? Well, look, what happened, Roger, was years and years later, they lost in court, ultimately, right? They were brought to court, evidence was presented, and it became common knowledge. I actually believe that's what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
I really do.
After lots of deaths and lots of
Yeah,
cancers and all
there's a
sorts
lot of collateral damage in between. Absolutely.
So we're now venturing in an era of 5G.
Yes.
That's going to be everywhere. You'd mentioned briefly about the different frequencies between maybe 4G and 5G, or from 1G up into 5G. Would you be able to just go through that again and just explain the differences?
Yes. This is really good stuff, Roger. It turns out throughout the entire world, almost all of the 5G, quote unquote, deployments are below 10 gigahertz. It's in the same range as up to 4G has been. And so a lot of the claims that there could be potential dangers and we don't know about it is being addressed, but with technology that's been around for 30 years. So that's not really where the concern is, because we already know that you're going to get neurological impact. We already know you're going to get physiological. We know what that range is. When you start talking about the real bandwidth needs, it's really to your home. What they do is they want to be able to provide wireless service to your house for your cable service, for your telephone service. And for that, they have to allow a lot more stuff to get through the wireless channel to your house. That's what's called a small cell site. The small cell site throughout the world are somewhere between 20 gigahertz, which is 2 to 3 times more than anything available up to 4G.
Wow.
And up to 90 gigahertz. And it can go up to 300 gigahertz. It's almost getting to the terahertz space. We don't know much about it, right? But here's some things we do know. One of the things we haven't talked about is, and I'm sure you understand it, given your commitment to the body, we know that the bacteria and virus in your stomach, there are 10 times more bacteria and virus in your stomach than cells in your body. So when there becomes an imbalance, that's not so good. And we could talk about that more, but my point is that we know RF signals disrupt that bacteria. We know through research that the bacteria like it. Maybe some more than others like it. And so some of this disruption we have with our biome, something in part because of the RF signals that are around your body and impacting the bacteria within the stomach lining. So that we know. Well, at 20 gigahertz, one study, by the way, there are no real studies in 5G, and that's some of the argument that we really don't know why. You're deploying something we have no idea what it's going to do. But we know at 20 gigahertz that the stomach bugs love it, maybe even more so than the RF up to 4G. So if I were to predict a trend, it would be, I think we're going to see more disrupted biome. Why? Because bugs like those signals, and they propagate, and they don't necessarily propagate at the same rate. So you can have good bugs that don't like it and bad bugs that love it. Bad bugs that can influence your body's response when you're trying to heal and all those kinds of things. So we know at 20 hertz, one of the very few studies I've been able to see, that there is some potential for small cell sites to have that impact into your body. We also know at 80, somewhere about 80, no, it's 90 gigahertz. There in war, there is a gun that can shoot an RF signal, a 90 gigahertz signal, and it can irritate the body. It turns out that your sweat glands resonate at 90 gigahertz. So they act as a little antenna. And when they're acting like an antenna, and you have this unit targeting you, the reason you run and heat up is because these things are being absorbed by your body by your own little antennas. So we know at 90 gigahertz, at the right power levels, it really can be disruptive. And it's currently used in crowd control and other war conditions.
Oh, really?
So,
Crowd
yeah.
control?
Oh, yeah. When you and I were at the college, and we wanted change, and then they pointed that gun at us, and we ran because it was getting too hot. It's used often for that purpose. So it's literally done today, and it's been around for a while at 90 gigahertz. But believe it or not, beyond that, we really don't know what the impact to the body is going to be. We really don't know how the organs of the body will respond. We don't know how the body has like 4,000 functions. I mentioned to you before that RF disrupts that. And I'll give you a little bit more. When you have, I mentioned the ultraviolet light. Well, blue light is right next to ultraviolet. So you know it's almost an ionized signal. So when you look at a monitor, those are LEDs, high intensity LEDs, and they're generating blue light. So when you have at night, you're thinking of going to bed, and you're looking at your tablet for 2 hours before you go to bed, there's a little protein, a cryptochrome protein in the back of the eye. That's the switch that turns on and off the melatonin. Yeah. So like all of a sudden, the RF, the electromagnetic radiation is now disrupting body function to the point where you're not generating the melatonin, which by the way is influenced by the gut as much as anything else. And you can't sleep. And you're wondering why I can't sleep. Well, that's because the switch didn't go on when it should have. It's also true when you have a cell phone right underneath your pillow. It's disrupting the pineal gland's control of the melatonin. And so there is disruption up to 4G that we're aware of for body functions. When it gets up to 20 gigahertz and higher, we just don't know. And remember where I started with this. I'm not worried about cancer. I'm really worried about the stress it does to the body and what's that impact. And will that push the 20% of us that are electric hypersensitive to the 30% of us? We just don't know. Science truly just doesn't know.
It leaves me discombobulated as to how this can even be legal.
Yeah, it's true.
When I think about it.
So here's some information. When you have, I said 1.6 watts for your cell phone is the standard in the US. In the UK, I think it's half that roughly. And so when you have a cell site that it's being transmitted to, that's 60 watts. If you're within 1,000 foot of that 60 watts transmitter, you're 3 times more likely to get cancer.
Oh
Three
my
times more
God.
likely. 3 times, right? 60 watts. Well, remember we were talking about the small cell site, right? The 5G small cell site.
Mm.
They have to transmit at 20 watts to only go 750 feet. So the signal can't go 5 miles like today's 60 watt generated cell phone transmission. It has to be 750 watt at 20 watts. We've never had 20 watts so close to us.
Yeah.
What's the impact? I don't know.
It's like a
I just
public
don't know.
experiment.
It is truly, it really is. And I'm not being facetious about that. We really just simply don't know. And it's not unusual that humans introduce stuff that's bad for us. We talked about that.
Mhm.
The trans fats. I don't know in the UK what it was. In the US, we had trans fats that we cooked our French fries in. And about 30 some odd years ago, a chemical engineer debated that I don't think it's the eggs that are killing us. I think it's the trans fats we're cooking with. And sure enough, it took 30 years. But last year, they banned it in the US. I'm not sure about the UK, but I know in the US, it was just banned. It took over 30 years before it got off the market. And
So how was trans fat sold? Like it was sold what, in jars in shops or something?
yeah, it was for your French fries. The commercial shops will put it in there and cook you in their French fries. They made the fries more crispy, and at the time there was collateral damage. The arteries would fill up, the cholesterol would build, and in part it was being hampered because of the trans fats we were using to cook in. But it took a long time for that biochemist to help us understand from the start to end what the ultimate problem was.
Mm.
So this is not unusual stuff. And so it's not unusual that stuff is deployed without really knowing its real impact.
Yeah.
But at the same time, as you are the recipient of those services, you need to be aware of how you want to live with that in your life. And there are things you can do.
I want us to, in a moment, get into what we can do to mitigate these EMFs and ways in protecting ourselves. But as we kind of glide into that, I want to ask if, I don't know, our bodies would evolve and adapt through the toxins, as a kind of hormetic stress thing.
Actually, wonderful question. I should have explained this. Because our bodies haven't seen this in our environment, it truly is just another toxin. And as you were speculating, I think, the body can figure out what to do with it. And over time, evolution will modify the body and how it performs to deal with that additional toxin in the environment. So the reality of it is, as I said before, I had a cell phone, had no one to call. Today, a 6-year-old child has it. For the last 30 some odd years, it has been snowballing into our life very, 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 very quickly. And our bodies haven't had a chance to build up resistance. It's literally that simple.
Okay, so it's been evolving quicker. The technology has been probably evolving quicker than our bodies have.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah, that's absolutely a fact. The electromagnetic radiation like sneaks in. If I hit you with my hand on your face, it's going to hurt because the body will have a mass that it sees. The RF signal is so small, it can't see it, and it just goes right through. And so it takes time for the body to sort of recognize it's a fist and I got to do something about it, but I haven't figured out what to do just yet.
Wow. This is fascinating and scary stuff.
Yeah, but I like to say, you actually do control a lot of it. You really can, and it's not a big deal if you're diligent.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem is you don't know how real it is until you have a chance to start exploring it a little bit. And remember, when I started in this, it was almost by accident that I got involved. I had a lot of background in this stuff. And one day my wife says to me that my sons were using their laptops on their laps for hours. And she says, that can't be good. I want grandchildren. These are adult men. And I said to her, the power levels of those signals are no way to disrupt the cell. There's no way that can be true. And then I said, but, I'm an engineer, so let me go take a quick look. And I started looking at the research. I was amazed. 25% of the male sperm is disrupted after 3 or 4 hours of exposure to an RF signal. So this was known several years ago. And I was like, I didn't know about it. And I was in the industry. How many other of us don't know it? And so the moral of the story is, don't put it on your lap for 4 hours and you'll be fine.
Is there a certain gap between the laptop and your genitals where it could be safe?
Yes, absolutely. These are exponentially dropping signals. In other words, the power can be really high when it's really close to you, but a very short distance away, an arm's length away, it's almost no problem at all with almost all the technology around us, except the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi's you got to keep a little further. But rule of thumb, just make sure that you don't stay on your cell phone for very long periods of time, for very long months, years, because the cumulative effect is clearly going to be there.
Yeah.
If you have to, put it in speaker mode, get earbuds like you and I are using, earbuds.
I've got the better ones downstairs, the ones from your company.
Yeah, you really should use it. Believe it or not,
I use it all the time. I just use this on the laptop. I don't know. Does it make a difference?
It does actually.
Right,
believe it or
right.
not, if you're electric hypersensitive, you would know you could feel the difference. And so it's the duration of time you use it. And if you use a cell phone 5 minutes a day for the rest of your life, you're going to be perfectly fine. It's not long enough to really have a negative impact. If you use it an hour to 2 hours continuously every day for 20 days, for 100 days, for 1,000 days, it will accumulate, and the probability will increase that that there may be negative effects. So time, the amount of time you use it, the duration, and the distance. Distance is where, when you have it directly, it's the worst case. Arm's length, it almost completely disappears. So anything in between is better, the farther away you get. Very, very simple rules. And so when I come home from the office, I take my cell phone and I put it at one part of my house. And then I walk around to the rest of the house, but I don't bring it with me. Right. So I'm reducing that exposure. When I put a Wi-Fi in my house, I take it and put it at the farthest place in my house where no one lives. And I turn it on. Everyone can get Wi-Fi service. I don't use Wi-Fi transmitters. I have Ethernet connection throughout the house.
Right.
And I simply reduce those exposures. In fact, the rule of thumb, Roger, is pretty simple. The analogy is one bee won't kill you, 1,000 will. So your goal is to turn off every stinger, every bee in your house when you can. By doing that, you actually substantially reduce exposures.
So let's get into that. Let's get into the mitigating measures, ways in which you can protect yourself around your home. So you just said right now, Ethernet in the router as opposed to Wi-Fi.
Yeah, actually, I'm talking to you right now. I have a laptop that's not used as a laptop. It's not in my lap. I have it several feet away from me. I have a monitor I use from the laptop that's connected Ethernet. I have a keyboard that's wired, not Bluetooth, a keyboard. I'm reducing with this configuration all the potential of all the electronics around me in this workstation. Very simple things to do, actually improves the performance, and it's much safer by taking a little bit of those kinds of actions.
Awesome. What else can we do around the house?
Around the house, you want to do, when you have your new speaker system that can be Wi-Fi, it can also be Ethernet. When you have your new TV controller that's an interactive Wi-Fi connection for your TV broadband services, you can have that connected Ethernet. Those are the bees in the room. Reduce those number of transmitters in those rooms, you substantially reduce those risks. When you use a cell phone, put it in another room, put it 4 foot away minimum, and don't worry about it. But don't put it in your pocket. Don't put it in your bra, because we know for sure that there are direct links to cancer that can occur with those close linkages. So very simple things about time distance and reducing the number of bees in the room will improve your environment. We're pretty safe.
What about the what do you call it? Your EMR, EML, like the like plug sockets and stuff like that.
Yeah, extreme low frequency stuff. Yes. What's interesting about that is that it can be dangerous too, right? Every electronic thing you have and operate generates that kind of emission. And so in this case, if you have any electrical device, you want to make sure that you're not sitting close to it. And close is right on top of it. If you're a couple of feet away, you're pretty safe. When you dry your hair, which is there's a high emissions when you dry your hair. You want to limit it. Don't do it as much, long durations of time. And simple exercises like that have a substantial impact in reducing those exposures. One thing we haven't spoke about, which is actually fairly important, and we've danced around it a little bit, is your bedroom. You really want to make sure that your bedroom is as clean as it can be, because it disrupts the body. There's no question about it. And we talked a little bit about the cell phone. You don't want it under your pillow. You want it in the other room. I personally turn my Wi-Fi off, even though it's in another room. I completely turn it off with a power plug. It goes on automatically in the morning at 7 o'clock. It goes off at 10 o'clock at night, automatically. I eliminate it. Clocks, you make sure that clock is at least 4 foot away from you so you can see it. In my case, it's harder because I don't see very well anymore, but you want it far away. You do not want it close to your head, because that's when ELF, that alternating current transmission is hitting your body, and it's truly disrupting body function. And so you really want the most pristine sleeping environment as you can, and that will more likely maximize the best sleep you'll have without much disruption from electronics.
Mm. What's your thoughts on grounding equipment, like maybe a grounding sheet, grounding mats, and that sort of thing?
Very interesting question. I'm an engineer, and I ran laboratories for years about this stuff. So
Yeah.
in some instances, I think it does make sense. Like if you have a grounding pad on your computer, on the base, on the floor, and you have your feet on it, and your computers are configured the way I described it, there may be some benefit. If you have that same configuration and a cell phone on your head for 3 hours a day, you're still going to die. The grounding pad has no impact with RF. RF will look towards that grounding, but if there's a source close to you, it's literally not changing the direction of that transmission, so there's no benefit. At night, I'm even careful about night when you put those grounding pads on your underneath the bed, because it's a source. It's a draw. RF shorts to ground. It looks for the fastest path, like lightning. Lightning looks for the quickest path. RF looks for the quickest path. So at night, you're attracting RF to you and then to the pad. I'm not sure that's a very good thing.
Right, right.
I really don't recommend it for that reason, because you could have excess exposures that you wouldn't have normally gotten. If you choose, sometimes a floating ground is better. That is, it's not grounded to your ground, your home ground, your house ground, but it floats, not connected to anything. Electricity will still find it, but it won't be as attracted to it. And so that's a little better. So I like grounding pads for certain conditions, but it's certainly not a saver for some cases. In fact, one of the, he believes he was the inventor of it, made the mistake of talking to me about it, because I'm pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. And I said, you don't know what you're talking about. And all of a sudden, the next day he came to me and he said, my God, I never thought about it the way you did. It can be dangerous, and we really should be careful about when we subscribe it and its use. But it can be safe for many cases, but it's potentially dangerous for others.
I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to check to make sure it's okay. I do have a grounding sheet on my bed. I have a grounding mat.
A grounding sheet is a floating ground.
Okay.
That's a good thing.
Okay.
A
Right.
grounding pad is a more direct path to ground. Not necessarily as good as the floating. The floating ground is probably all you need.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, really. It's sort of, it's not going to excessively attract, and you're going to be fairly safe if it has the right level of conductivity in it.
Talk to me about Defender Shield. Defender Shield is the company you.
Yeah. Well, Roger. Remember I told you the story about my wife and wanting grandchildren?
Yeah.
Right? I told you that story. Well, by the way, I don't have grandchildren yet. But at that time, I said, it was funny. I was in the electrical world for so many years, but I was educated as a mechanical engineer. So what I did is I said, I can figure out how to shield it. And I sort of developed a shielding technology that shielded the private parts of the man and the woman. And I thought at that time, we're not victims. There are things we can do, not just moving, not just time, not just duration, not just distance. There's also shielding mechanics you can use to help when there's technology close to your body. It started with the Defender Pad, which is a device that shields the emissions, the ELF and RF that are being emitted from a laptop. That's where I started. It was because I felt we're not victims. I didn't know it was a problem, but I know I can do something about it.
Mm.
And then we were going, I figured I'd build 1,000 of these. And then if anybody buys it, the 1,000, then I'd keep on making them. If not, I'd quit. Turned out that never stopped for the last 10 years. We just keep on adding. And I had the technology. And then I read an article about these parents bought a 16-year-old child a cell phone. And she was a very healthy young lady, but she used the phone all the time. Within a year, she had frontal lobe cancer and passed away. And that really disturbed me because I knew if she was using my cell phone shielding, the signal can't get through. It just can't get through. And so I said, let's take our technology and let's apply it to cell phones. And we've never stopped. We keep on building technologies and our technologies into other products to protect the human body.
Talk to me about the headphones. Sorry, yeah, the earbuds, as you call it, that you have.
Yeah, actually, that was another thing. It turns out because we deal with so many electric hypersensitive, they couldn't put earbuds in their ears. The electronic current and the emissions from that around their head bothered them. So I said, I can fix that. I'll take the signal up halfway, I'll convert it to a speaker, and I'll go acoustical up to the ear. And that's what we did. And that was the start. I eliminated the source completely by going acoustical.
What does that mean?
That means acoustical is when you hear something in the air, that's acoustics.
Right.
It's no interference. It's literally the purest sense in a sense, right? And I just took a speaker rather than put a speaker in the room and played it. I put a tube into the speaker to my ear.
And that's
way,
what you have there along.
Right. That's what I'm doing. It's all air.
When that came to me, when it came in the post, I was trying to figure out, do I detach the tube? And I was almost trying to detach it. I was like,
no.
I was like, wow, this is hanging down to my lap. Maybe I need to take it off.
No.
Right.
And the other thing, Roger, was I really tried to build the best we can. And I wanted to build earbuds that people who listen to music would love to use. So the quality of the earbuds are the highest quality that you can have. And that was driven by our customers, those who were sensitive to electromagnetic radiation.
That's perfect.
Yeah. So we've been driven by the need of the customer base.
So you have those, and you have the it's like a fanny pack. What do you call it?
It is a fanny pack, right? It's a pouch. That's what it is.
Yeah,
it's a fanny pack, and that's because people maybe just don't want to use a defender shield or any other shielding for their phone, but they want protection when it's close to the body. So we have shielding inside where you put it in and you're perfectly safe. And the phone rings. Mm-hmm. And when you do use it, there's an exposure, but if you limit your time, that pouch is more than adequate for what you need. And we have that. And it's been designed by the females of our team. Mm-hmm. Before, my son and I were the only ones doing this. And, everything was black and very utilitarian. And of course, now we have design in what we do. So.
Yeah. Do you have anything else? You've got these two things.
We have the blankets. We have a baby blanket. It bothered me that women who are pregnant, we know that it's in vitro. There can be influence before the child's born. Yeah. And so when a woman is pregnant, they can expose a child. And in fact, there was a study in San Francisco a couple of years ago where they measured the RF levels in the room, and then they looked at a bunch of exposures for a bunch of women. And what they found is if the levels were high, they were 3 times more likely to have miscarriage in the first trimester. It was that serious. So we actually created a blanket for them. So when they were sitting around, they would be they'd have that protection. If their child was born, that child could have that protection. That's the floating ground that you use when you sleep.
Right.
Yeah, we tried it. We did it for the child, and so we keep on creating products that people can choose to use along with their technologies and keep them safe.
That's really good. What about the full-on blanket for adults?
Yeah, well, it's funny. We weren't sure anybody was going to buy the baby blanket. Then we introduced a mid-size full blanket, and we're selling that like crazy. Now we have a queen-size blanket, and everyone's buying that blanket. So it's like when we think there's a need, we try to build and we try to expand it if the customer base suggests that's something they want from us. And it turns out we've been doing. We now have, by the way, like earbuds. I went to a conference and there was a woman who had a autistic child, and he couldn't put our earbuds in his ear. It bothered him. And that was about 2 years ago. And so I said, I'll build something for you. And just regular headsets that have acoustical links.
Right.
I actually began developing that, and 2 years later, we now have it in production. And so I'm going to have and they're almost studio quality.
Wow.
So you keep the technology up, build the best product you can, and keep people safe.
That's it.
Yeah,
I definitely got
simple
to
as
check
that.
those out when it's ready.
Yeah, we should have them very shortly, and it's for kids. I still have the name of that woman who had a problem with her son.
Oh,
I'm going to
wow.
just send it to her. All right.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we try to help if we can.
Yeah. So what other measures do you think would help people to keep safe? Do you think there's anything to do with diet that would help at all?
Oh, yeah, we haven't spoke about this, Roger. I've hinted about the biome. It turns out that electric hypersensitive, there are when you there are standards for your biome, and when you have it analyzed, there are everything kept in balance. When there's an imbalance, when there's a bacteria that's more than it should be, it does impact the way the body's responding. It turns out we've found certain bacteria propagate with the electric hypersensitive more than others. They're always out of range. And that has impact to their own immune system. So we've actually been finding ways of measuring that, and then bringing together probiotics that can help that imbalance back to balance. At the same time, the food you eat is extraordinarily important for that biome. And if there's a biome that's out and you're taking a probiotic, but you're eating crap, you still have the problem with the probiotic. I mean, with the biome. And so the what you eat is extraordinarily important. Balance. You're wanting to improve the cell danger response by feeding your body in a healthy way. So it is truly important. The more you're electric hypersensitive, the more important it is. And so what you eat, your biome, and and I've talked about this before, the neurological stuff. We know that there's modifications in the patterns, the alpha beta patterns of the brain. So we know that there are tools on the marketplace that helps adjust that to a more standard pattern And that's becoming important for the electrohypersensitive. So there are a lot of things going far beyond what we do that's happening in clinics that we work with to try to help people who are dealing with particularly hypersensitive,
Mm.
and bringing these tools to them so they improve their own health.
Right, right.
And it is
Does
important.
yeah, of course. Um, does EMF deplete the body of any particular type of minerals as such, where it's good to have it as a supplementation?
I'm not going to answer the question because it came into my mind. Everyone who's electrohypersensitive has excess zinc.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we don't know why, right? You, I don't understand why, but there's absolutely true that that there are um, patterns of weakness in the mineral world that does impact the body itself. That is part of the response to the emissions that they're in their environment. So, and I'm not an expert at any of that stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
but one of the things that triggered in my mind was zinc. Who would ever thought it was zinc? I actually, and women, I think it's hormonal. There are a lot of reasons why that's, but every one of them had the same problem. All of them had the excess zinc.
That's really
It's
interesting.
like really strange stuff. So
Mm.
those things are important, and they should be tried to be kept in check, particularly if you're hypersensitive. And it does help if you eat right and you do the things and you minimize exposures. It does improve your quality of life.
Mm, what about any kind of biohacks like hot and cold exposure, um, infrared?
Actually, light is useful.
Mhm.
And I know clinics have been successful in balancing using light therapy.
Okay.
So I know that's been successful. Um, a lot of the biohacking stuff sort of missed the mark a little bit. And that's one of the things we're trying to figure out with some clinics are how do we figure out what those biohacks really should be. In fact, we're also trying now to figure out how we may be able to bring some supplement. I really believed we could nourish the cell with a vitamin mix. I now believe it's more likely true that it's the peptides that are more likely to be successful in changing the tide of the exposure, as well as high concentrations of the right vitamin C and other things that
Mhm.
we know helps the cell rebuild itself and evolve.
I think Dr. Joseph McCullough in his book EMF. Have you checked that book out at all?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Did he
I know.
mention something about magnesium?
Magnesium is something that is known to be helpful, but I'm not sure if it's the right long term. One of the things that we're finding is, and here's another layer of the onion, that some of the fundamental building blocks of chemicals you need are actually generated by bacteria.
Right.
And if you get that in check, then you get everything else in check in time. And so I'm trying to go to the source. And yeah, magnesium is in dark chocolate, and you should eat it because you're going to feel good about the chocolate as well as you're improving your body health. So no, it is something that we know for sure has been helpful. I'm just not sure if it's the long-term protocol. I
Yeah.
just don't know.
I'm trying to think of the long term for everybody who,
Right. Yeah.
you know, EMF is probably going to be here to stay.
Yeah.
So we need to think of a way how at
Yeah.
least we
And
can help the
believe it or
body.
not, it's the diet. it really is an important part of your lifestyle that does help regulate the ability of the cell to protect itself. That's really what you're trying to do, and it's the natural way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not an expert on diet, but we do have experts we're working with that actually coaches people on what is the right diet for them, based on, believe it or not, their biome.
Yeah. I think that's really important for like a wide variety of things, in all fairness.
Yeah.
I've had a microbiome test and learned about all the different bacteria in my body. And it was quite interesting to find that if my body needs to produce a certain type of reaction, I need to eat a combination of certain
Right.
types of
Yeah.
foods for that to happen.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Really fascinating.
It's like, it is fascinating. To me, it's like the next generation of medical treatment, finding the body's ability to fix itself, making sure that the right stuff's going in so everything's going to work is becoming important, but yet it was always important. We just lost sight of it.
Yeah. So is there anything else which you would suggest, anything else you think can help people to make the right choices to live a healthy life, EMF protected?
Well, you're the architect of your own destiny. And we've talked about a lot of things. Some things seem a little scary, a little negative, but I don't look at it that way at all. There are things you can control in our environment that minimize those exposures, and you're the architect of that, no one else. Don't rely on your government. Don't rely on your friends. Don't rely on your neighbors. It's you who have to take control. And when you have children, you particularly should be careful, because those exposures are starting at an earlier age, and they have to live with it far longer than you do. So making sure the right protocol's been established for your children is sort of pretty important to start today. So, and learn. One of the things we haven't talked about is I have Defender Shield products at defendershield.com. I spend a lot of time trying to get the latest understanding of this space. So we have an educational section, a learning section, and we put out a blog on all the subject matters, like smart meters. You keep on hearing about smart meters. Well, I just edited the final version of what is a smart meter and is it dangerous? It's not as dangerous as you think it is, if you think about what it is. And so we try to break that stuff down in our blogs, so you have a practical sense of what you should be concerned about and what not to be concerned about.
Oh, that's brilliant. What is the website link for?
Defendershield.com. Yeah. And that's where they can get our book too, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Go to the what?
Radiation Nation.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Radiation Nation. There you go.
Awesome.
Go there and get a book and learn a little bit about it. I have like 6-7 pages just on what 5G is about and what it is that you should be worried about. Rather than the controversy in the media, oftentimes not very well grounded with facts. So we try to help clarify that for people.
So not only talking about 5G, has it got ways in which you can prepare for it at all, or is it just information about it?
We just talk about information about it.
Okay. Right. Okay. At least they know.
Roger, I actually have now shielding for 5G. I've been working for several vendors for years, working to find a way of shielding these higher shielding materials. And we've been able to develop it. So I'm like really excited. I'm not sure what you're going to be able to do beyond distance and duration and shielding. So all three still apply, and keep it in mind.
Would you be working on something that you can actually carry around with you? Is that one of the things you're working on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Carrying around, if you have a device and you are wanting to use that device that's 5G oriented, you'll be able to do that. All the other 5G you're walking around in the environment, you're not concerned because the transmitters are far away. So don't panic about it. Simply recognize you got to be careful and not too close to these transmitters. But you're fairly safe, and don't panic about it.
That's it. Panic. That
Yeah.
only disrupts your immune system as well, isn't it? There's a lot of
Yeah.
people stressing, and that's
Oh
not
yeah.
helpful.
Right. I told you, Dr. Ali. He's such a wonderful man. He's done such good work on electric hypersensitive and the suppression of the immune. He's documented what the linkages are, the body paths that it takes, and why it's suppressed. He's done wonderful work. We do have a better understanding. So it is real, and his work is scientifically proven to be accurate, peer-reviewed, and I'd listen to him if I were you.
And what's the name again?
Dr. Ali Johansson.
Ali Johansson. All
Yeah,
right.
Johansson. He's from Sweden.
Okay.
He's been doing this for years. He was a professor in Sweden.
Does he have audiobooks at all? I'm an audio fan, actually. I do like audiobooks. Or podcasts, possibly.
I know he's done podcasts.
Okay.
He's a wonderful, a man that tells the facts. Doesn't elaborate. He simply tells you what the facts are about it. That's why I really, really like Ali, because he's just truthful about what the issues are and what you can do about it.
Perhaps I can talk to him later.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend it, Dr. Ali Johansson.
Yeah, an introduction would be nice if you know him. Just
I do.
Yeah,
I do. He read my book, and I sent it to him in a draft, and he said, "I actually learned something."
Wow, that's cool.
He'd been doing it for 30 years, but his was for the medical side. He's a neurologist, I think, and mine was the engineering side. So I sort of balanced everything out by spanning both.
That's interesting. You could possibly do a book together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true, because this is science. We're not inventing something that doesn't exist. It's engineering science that's in play, and it's not mystical. We understand it.
Yeah.
And helping each other understand those worlds helps us do a better job of what we're set out to do.
Absolutely. So where can people find you? Obviously, you've got your website. You have an Instagram page as well, isn't it?
We do. Instagram, Facebook.
Facebook.
Yeah, we try to use all the social media outlets that we can to try
and it's called Defender Shield.
Defender Shield. Yeah, all the Defender Shield. Yeah.
Are you on Twitter as well?
We are.
Okay. Awesome.
So, yeah, we try to be in all forms of social media, as anybody in this business does.
I know,
today.
right? It's exhausting, but it's got to be done.
It really does. It really does.
Oh, well, I'm going to write all of that in the show notes so people can find all your information about your book, website, and social media links. And Daniel, it's been incredible. Don't know what else to say. It's been amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Part of why I'm good is because you're good. Having a conversational style in the direction you want to take it helps your audience understand what they want to see in it. So I really think it's really important. It's hard to find people who can converse about this stuff. But I appreciated the opportunity to chat with you today. It's important stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I appreciate it as well. It's something that affects everybody. So,
So by the way, I didn't want to, you can't add this part, but I'm actually negotiating right now with a very natural fruit fermentation that helps oxygenate the body, particularly the frontal lobe, and enhance the response to exposures at the cell level. I'm really, really excited about that. It's not typically what engineering groups do, but
No.
I'm finding we need to do that because we have to help people solve the problem. And so I'm really, really excited about that.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, it will be. I'll let you know because that's stuff like I'm pretty sure you'd be interested in because it's really health-oriented stuff.
Exactly. No, as you get closer and closer to the final stages, definitely got to let me know.
I will. I definitely will.
Awesome.
Definitely will.
Well, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Fantastic. Brilliant.
Well, I'm sorry about the mismatch in timing, but we sort of caught up and it sort of worked out.
I know, right? We made it happen. I shot an email. I'm like, I think we've got an appointment soon. I don't know. we made it happen. We made it happen.
Very good. Very good. Again, Roger, thanks so much for inviting me on. I really do appreciate you letting me.
Thank you very much.
On your team.
It's all good. All right. You take care.
I will. And so should you. And we'll talk soon, maybe.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You take care.
You have a good one. Bye.
You too. Goodbye.